Great. Okay, I'm very happy to have an opportunity to tell you about the Next Generation Ecosystem Experiment, or NGEE Arctic. This is a new Department of Energy 10-year project, which is just being initiated, and I am speaking on behalf of a team of about 50. Here are shown the project leads, and Stan Walshinger is the PI of the project, and Larry Hintzman from University of Alaska Fairbanks is our chief scientist. This project is really focused on developing a predictive understanding of terrestrial ecosystem feedbacks to climate. And we've chosen to poise our study in the Arctic because, as we've heard and we know, Arctic processes will be significant drivers to ecosystem climate feedbacks at the local scale. And also because these are vulnerable landscapes that are in transition with abundant permafrost, ground ice, and soil organic carbon that really complicates prediction of these ecosystem feedbacks to climate. And so we recognize that in order to that it's very necessary to understand the mechanisms that control the carbon and energy transfer in the biosphere, not only under current conditions, but in the future as these landscapes evolve with warming. So what we're showing here is just a figure of these landscape evolutions that are accelerated by warming or permafrost thaw. We have here two very common geomorphic units in the Arctic landscape. On the upper right, we see thaw lakes and some remnants of thaw lakes after they've drained. These can drain by a variety of mechanisms, and they can do so very quickly, sometimes on the order of hours to days. In the bottom left, what we see are these polygonal ground and transitions from low-centered polygons, more healthy permafrost, to high-centered polygons where permafrost is more degrading. And what's important about these common landscape features in the Arctic is that they have the potential to really change the water distribution, both vertically and laterally, as we heard in the last presentation. And that in turn, that change in water distribution has a real potential to change vegetation dynamics above ground, and also to change the potential of the microbial biology in the below ground to degrade that organic rich carbon and produce greenhouse gases. The problem is that these coupled hydrological, geological, biological processes that control these feedbacks are not well understood, nor are they well represented in models. So the NGEE science question, keeping in mind this is a 10-year project, is poised on trying to quantify how permafrost thaw and degradation influences that landscape evolution, how that in turn influences water distribution, the above-ground biology, the below-ground biology, and feedbacks to climate. And our real goal is development of a process-rich ecosystem model that extends from the bedrock to the top of the canopy, where the evolution of the Arctic ecosystem in this changing climate can be modeled at the scale of a high-resolution Earth system grid model, so say on the order of 30 kilometers by 30 kilometers. So this is a large challenge, and why is it so complicated? What we're going to look at here is Arctic landscape at a close view, and then stepping up to the scale where we want to be able to predict this and feed this into the climate models at 30 kilometer by 30 kilometer grid. And at the smaller scale, here we're looking at the order of 1 to 10 kilometer length scales. We're looking at polygonal ground. And by the way, each of these boxes here fits into the box on the next slide or the next image. And what we see is the polygonal ground that's influenced, well, water and snow distribution, like we saw in the last presentation, vegetation. And what we can't see, but we can infer, is that these variations in water have also impacted redox distributions in the subsurface, which influence the ability of those microbes to degrade that organic carbon. And so what we expect then is spatially variable at the local scale albedo, as well as greenhouse gas fluxes. As we move up in scale, and again now we're moving these boxes into further and further, we're stepping away from the land surface, we're looking at, I guess, what we would call the landscape scale. And we see that that polygonal ground is really in the background of that land surface matrix, and what's in the foreground are these thaw lakes. Again, we expect that these lakes are going to contribute very significantly to albedo, to carbon cycling. And then finally, we move up to the scale where we really want to interface with the climate models. And we see that we're in Barrow, Alaska, and we see a mosaic of land surface features, drainage networks, and the Thaw lakes, and the polygonal ground. And so when we look at the Arctic system in this way, we recognize how difficult, if not impossible, it would be to really just study these processes at this very local scale and linearly feed these up into that some sort of upscaling mechanism and represent those at that larger grid. Instead, what we recognize is that we really do have to understand what processes are controlling energy and carbon balances at the native scales where those processes are occurring. And we also have to recognize that there are likely to be feedbacks, nonlinearity, and really complex behavior. So it's a complex, it's a hierarchical system, and so NGEE has developed a research scope recognizing these characteristics of the system. What I'm showing here is the NGEE research framework. As I said, we're very interested in scale integration across those scales where these processes are happening, and we're very interested in process integration. And by process integration, we're interested in understanding the key controls of the three components of the Arctic system: the hydrogeomorphology, the soil biogeochemistry, the plant dynamics, and the integration between all of those. How do we go about this? NGEE is really a model-driven enterprise. We're interested in developing a predictive understanding of this system, and how we do it is with very tight integration between simulations, observations, and experiments that extend really from the molecular scale all the way up to the landscape scale. And so what I'd like to do now, and in the rest of the talk, just to give you a flavor about some of the NGEE research portfolio, is step through some tasks associated with scale integration as well as process integration. Keeping in mind that the process integration, we've really prioritized processes that we think are necessary to reduce that model uncertainty in ecosystem climate feedbacks. Okay, so starting with a scale integration, we've developed a plan for a hierarchical NGEE simulation framework, and actually we'll be asking the community for feedback on this early next year. And what we envision that we need to be able to develop a predictive understanding of these ecosystem feedbacks to climate is at least 3 scales of models, where at the largest scale we have a 3D process resolving models that can deal with ice wedge dynamics, the role of thermal karst in the reorganization of mass and energy fluxes. At the next scale up, we need a 2D, maybe a 3D model that can resolve hydrological connectivity and the changes in that connectivity as that land surface evolves. And then finally, at the next scale up, we need a model that can represent these Arctic tundra processes in climate scale and climate change predictions. Now, we're not just talking about a hierarchical model where we have small-scale processes feeding up. We really have feedback between both upscaling and downscale, and what we envision over reasonable time steps are cross-scale iterative solutions that we think are very necessary to honor energy mass and momentum conservation. And what we also envision is that the transfer of this information up and down scale will be organized around these geomorphic units, such as the Thaw lakes, such as the polygonal ground that we've already discussed. Okay, so this is the framework for integrating our data, for testing our hypotheses, for feeding this information up so we can look at ecosystem feedbacks to climate. And what I'd like to do now is step through some of the process-based understanding that we're planning on doing in these 3 system components, again keeping in mind that we're looking at processes that are high priority for reducing model uncertainty. And the first challenge is called hydrogeomorphology, and as we've already talked about earlier in this presentation and in the last presentation, as these landscapes evolve, great potential to change water and heat distribution. And so this challenge is really focused on trying to understand the controls of those thermal karst and what that means as far as heat and water distribution. And what I'll do for each of these challenges is show you an example task or 2, and a real key component of the hydrogeomorphology challenge is developing, validating, parameterizing a thermo-hydrogeological mechanical model that can simulate the evolution of this landscape and the associated water and heat distribution. And in fact, in the last presentation, we've already seen a few of these images here. There are models out there that are looking at some components of that system, but we absolutely do not have right now a high-resolution landscape simulator that can capture those processes now and as that land system evolves with warming. Another key component component is how do we bring together a variety of different data sets, subsurface point data, subsurface geophysics, remote sensing data, to be able to cleverly parameterize and validate this model and understand how subsurface variability in properties reflects land surface variability, particularly microtopography. The next key component of the system that we're going to talk about is the Soil Biogeochemistry Challenge. And this is also an extremely important component of the system. We know that there's a lot of organic carbon locked up in these frozen soils, and the real concern and a large source of uncertainty is what's going to happen with warming as this active layer where the microbes are degrading this organic expands and we get the production of greenhouse gases. And these mechanisms associated with organic matter decomposition are really thought to be critical and could be big enough that they transition these ecosystems from what's been traditionally a greenhouse gas sink to a greenhouse gas source. So again, the models, the mechanisms and the rates controlling this organic matter decomposition in and around these Arctic landscape features now and as they evolve are not well understood or represented in models, and that's the focus of this challenge. Again, we've identified a variety of objectives that we think are high priorities for reducing model uncertainties. And what I highlight here is just one task, which is really focused on trying to improve our understanding of temperature controls on greenhouse gas fluxes by doing coupled laboratory field measurements and simulations to incorporate revised temperature respiration response functions into models to reduce uncertainty. And here we're looking at a study by Bill Riley, simulation study that recognizes sensitivity of methane emissions as a function of Q10, this respiration parameter, where most of the work's been done near room temperature, and we know our Arctic soils are order of magnitude less than that. And so a lot of work needed here. Okay, finally, this last system component is the plant dynamics challenge, and we've said that these landscapes are going to thaw, and that'll change not only moisture availability, but nitrogen availability. That, in turn, has a huge potential to change both the structure and the function of these tundra plant communities and to feed back to climate in ways that we don't understand right now. And so we, again, have developed a suite of objectives. Each of these has many tasks. Here I focus on one particular task, which is improved representation of Arctic plant functional types within models. And so we have a variety of tasks in the laboratory, in the field, developing improved representations of plant functional types that particularly consider nitrogen and water acquisition strategies, and then using those in dynamic vegetation models to understand if we can simulate that pattern distribution of plants, what it means in terms of feedbacks to climate now and as that land surface evolves. Okay, so we've talked about the development of a hierarchical simulator. We've talked about process understanding in each of those three key system components. And of course, what we're really interested in doing is bringing that all together to address the NGEE questions that we've already posed earlier. How does permafrost thaw have these cascade of processes that ultimately really influence ecosystem feedbacks to climate? This is a big challenge to be able to do this. This is something that we think we won't be able to tackle till we're several years down the road and we have better process understanding under our belts, better simulators to be able to do that. But when we are ready, we'll be, I think, well poised to address some really important questions. Will CO2 release from soil organic carbon decomposition be greater than the CO2 that's taken up by plants? How will changes in geomorphology affect the trajectory of methane emissions over time? What processes govern the rate at which Arctic albedo changes, as we've been talking about today? So a lot of important things that need to be done that need both process understanding and simulation capabilities. So I'd like to wrap up by saying a little bit about why DOE, Department of Energy, for those of you who are not familiar with it, has a real mission focused around energy and in the environment. So this falls squarely within Department of Energy mission. Above that, though, DOE scientists are really well suited to carry out model-driven enterprises that take advantage of our high-performance computing capabilities and also to develop and maintain long-term research facilities and long-term databases such as we propose to do here. Additionally, we have a lot of expertise across the national labs, and with our partner institutions, we can and we have for this team brought together a real multidisciplinary group of experts where we have a lot of the basically the expertise to tackle these really tough questions that involve a lot of different aspects of science. And I'd like to wrap up by saying that we hope that NGEE, as we get going, will really serve as a community resource. We will have well-instrumented and characterized field sites, and we very much welcome the community to join us working at these field sites, as well as to ask for samples, for example. We will have extensive databases and ideally community codes that can be used by others to just advance Arctic science in general. And we will be hosting a variety of workshops, both to get feedback on our plans, but to really solidify collaboration possibilities now and in the future. So I'd like to thank you for your time and mention that there'll be a whole town hall meeting on this tomorrow, and so there's an hour dedicated to delving in and talking a little bit deeper about what motivates NGEE and some of the modeling efforts and some of the process-driven science. So we welcome you to join us, and we also keep our project website pretty up to date. So thank you very much.